Number 10. The Vinci figurines. Thousands of years before the rise of empires, temples, and written civilizations in the form most people recognize, communities in southeastern Europe were already shaping strange human figures out of clay. Today, these objects are known as the Vinci figurines, linked to the Neolithic Vinci culture that flourished in the Balkans. At first glance, some of them seem almost simple: small bodies, stylized faces, geometric features. But the longer you look, the more unsettling they become. Many of the figurines do not feel warm or human in the ordinary sense. Their faces can appear mask-like, expressionless, even unnervingly detached, as if they were never meant to represent ordinary people at all. Some have exaggerated eyes, rigid postures, or abstract forms that make them feel closer to idols, spirits, or ritual beings than everyday sculpture. That ambiguity is what has kept them so haunting. No one can say with full certainty whether they represented deities, ancestors, protective spirits, social identities, or something even more symbolic and ceremonial. That uncertainty matters because the figurines were clearly not random objects. They were made deliberately, repeated across settlements, and embedded in a world where symbolism, ritual, and belief were woven into daily life. In an age without written explanations, these objects survive as silent witnesses to whatever powers or meanings their makers believed surrounded them. They may have stood in homes, shrines, or ritual spaces, carrying a role that was once perfectly understood and is now almost entirely lost. And that is what makes their origin so eerie. The Vinci figurines seem to come from a world old enough to feel almost unreachable, yet intimate enough that someone once held them in their hands and believed they mattered. Whether they were sacred, protective, or feared, they suggest that even in the deep Neolithic past, people were already creating objects not just to depict life, but to engage with forces beyond it. Number 9. Roman curse tablets. The Roman world is often remembered for roads, armies, architecture, and law. But beneath that polished image was another side of ancient life, one filled with fear, jealousy, revenge, and appeals to unseen powers. One of the clearest surviving traces of that darker world comes in the form of Roman curse tablets, thin sheets of lead inscribed with messages meant to harm, bind, or punish another person. These tablets, known in Latin as defictiones, were not casual superstitions scribbled in passing. They were serious ritual objects, often carefully written with names, accusations, and specific requests directed toward gods, spirits, or underworld powers. Some asked for thieves to suffer. Others begged for rivals in love, business, or sport to be ruined. Some were folded, pierced, or nailed as if the physical act of wounding the metal helped transfer the curse into the supernatural world. In many cases, they were hidden in graves, wells, temples, or sacred waters, places believed to bring the message closer to the forces that could carry it out. What makes them so chilling is how personal they are. These are not grand mythological objects tied only to kings or priests. They reveal ordinary people turning to ritual harm when anger, desperation, or obsession pushed them beyond ordinary justice. A tablet might curse a thief by name, beg for divine punishment, or try to cripple an opponent before a race. In that sense, the curse tablets feel disturbingly modern in emotion, even while their method belongs to a darker spiritual landscape. Their terrifying origin lies in that fusion of intimacy and malice. Someone sat down, wrote another person's name into cold metal, and deliberately placed that object into a ritual setting with the hope that unseen powers would destroy a life. The tablets survive as proof that the ancient world did not only build systems of law and order, it also built private weapons of hatred, made not from steel, but from words, fear, and the belief that the dead or the gods could be persuaded to attack the living. Number 8. The Shigir Idol. Deep in the Ural Mountains of Russia, preserved for thousands of years in a peat bog, archaeologists uncovered a wooden object so strange and so ancient that it still feels almost unreal. Known as the Shigir idol, it is the oldest known monumental wooden sculpture in the world, dating back to a time far earlier than the pyramids or Stonehenge. Carved from larch wood and originally standing much taller than it does today, the idol is covered with geometric patterns and eerie human-like faces that seem to emerge from the surface like watchers frozen in timber. What makes the Shigir idol so unsettling is not only its age, but its expression. This is not the kind of object most people imagine when they think of deep prehistory. It does not look crude or accidental. It looks symbolic, deliberate, and deeply charged with meaning. The carved faces appear one above another, while the zigzags and lines suggest a coded visual language that may once have been perfectly clear to the people who made it. But whatever that meaning was, it has long since been lost. Some researchers believe the idol may have had ritual or spiritual significance, perhaps representing ancestors, protective beings, territorial markers, or a map of cosmological ideas. Others think the geometric designs may have carried symbolic warnings or encoded mythic knowledge. The truth remains uncertain, and that uncertainty is exactly what gives the object its power. Because when something this old appears this intentional, it forces us to admit that prehistoric belief systems may have been far more complex and psychologically rich than we usually assume. Its terrifying origin lies in the sense that it was not made merely to be seen. It was made to stand, to confront, to signify something greater than itself. Somewhere in a vanished world of forests, spirits, and ritual memory, people carved a towering wooden presence and gave it a face, then another, then... And now, after surviving nearly impossible stretches of time, it still stares back at us without ever explaining what it was meant to guard, represent, or warn against. Number 7. The Egyptian opening of the mouth tools. Ancient Egypt is often associated with tombs, mummies, and elaborate visions of the afterlife. But behind those famous images was a ritual system so intricate that even the tools used in burial ceremonies carried enormous spiritual weight. Among the most unsettling of these were the instruments used in the opening of the mouth ritual, a ceremony performed on statues, coffins, and the dead themselves to symbolically restore their senses in the next world. To the Egyptians, death was not the end of existence, but a dangerous transition. The dead needed to breathe, see, speak, hear, and eat again in the afterlife. The opening of the mouth ritual was meant to make that possible. Priests used specialized ceremonial tools, including adze-like instruments and other ritual implements, to touch the mouth and face of the deceased or their funerary image. These were not medical tools in any modern sense. They were sacred objects used to reactivate a body for life beyond death. That origin is what makes them so disturbing. These tools were created for direct contact with the dead, not to preserve a corpse physically, but to prepare it spiritually for another realm. In effect, they existed to help a silent body speak again. They were part of a belief system in which the boundary between life and death was fragile, negotiable, and full of danger. If the ritual failed, the dead could be cut off from what came next. If it succeeded, the dead would awaken into eternity. What survives today are the instruments of that transition, beautifully crafted, deeply symbolic, and inseparable from the ancient fear that death required intervention. Their terrifying origin is not rooted in violence, but in something almost more unsettling, the belief that a person could lie preserved and silent, while ritual specialists used sacred tools to reopen the senses of someone who no longer belonged to the world of the living. Number 6. Moche sacrificial knives. On the northern coast of ancient Peru, the Moche built one of the most visually powerful and ritualized cultures in the pre-Columbian Americas. Their ceramics, murals, and metalwork reveal a society deeply concerned with status, warfare, ceremony, and blood. Among the most chilling objects linked to that world are the sacrificial knives, often called tumi. curved ritual blades associated with elite ceremony and, in some contexts, human sacrifice. What makes these knives so disturbing is not simply their form, but the world of meaning around them. Moche art repeatedly depicts scenes of bound captives, priestly figures, and ritual bloodletting, suggesting that sacrifice was not an occasional horror at the edge of society, but something woven into the symbolic structure of power itself. The blade, in that context, was not just a weapon. It was an instrument of sacred transformation, a tool used to turn violence into ritual. Archaeological evidence has only deepened that unease. Excavations at sites such as Huaca de la Luna have uncovered remains consistent with sacrificial activity, reinforcing the idea that some of the scenes shown in Moche art were not mythical exaggerations, but reflections of real ceremonial practices. That means these knives may have been present at moments where religion, spectacle, and death met directly. A polished metal object shaped with great skill may have been carried by someone who believed that blood itself had cosmic value. Their terrifying origin lies in that fusion of beauty and brutality. These were not crude blades made in panic or war. They were ceremonial objects, carefully crafted and symbolically charged, created for a setting in which human death could be staged as an offering. The knife survives, the metal survives, but the full ritual world that justified its use has fallen away, leaving behind one of the clearest reminders that some of the ancient world's most beautiful objects were born in places where fear and sacred violence stood side by side. Number 5. Aztec death whistles. Few ancient objects have gained such a chilling reputation in the modern imagination as the Aztec death whistle. Small, often skull-shaped or shaped in other unsettling forms, these ceramic instruments produce a sound that many people describe as less like music and more like a human scream torn out of the air. Whether heard in recordings or recreated in demonstrations, the effect can be deeply unnerving, which is exactly why the objects have become famous. Their terrifying aura comes partly from uncertainty. Some whistles have been found in ritual and burial contexts, and modern interpretations often connect them to warfare, death symbolism, or ceremonies involving the underworld and divine power. In a culture where sacrifice, cosmic struggle, and the maintenance of sacred order were all taken with profound seriousness, an object capable of producing such an unnatural sound would have fit easily into a world where ritual performance was meant to overwhelm the senses. That said, the exact role of these whistles is still debated. Not every dramatic modern claim about them is equally certain, but even with a cautious reading of the evidence, they remain haunting. They were clearly shaped intentionally, and the sounds they produce are unlike the melodies most people expect from ancient instruments. They seem designed not to comfort, but to disturb, to announce or to transform atmosphere. In ritual, that can be its own kind of power. Their terrifying origin lies in the possibility that sound itself was being used as a ceremonial force. Somewhere in the Aztec world, a figure lifted one of these small ceramic objects to the mouth and released a cry that may have echoed across a temple precinct, a battlefield, or a burial rite. Whether calling the dead, frightening the living, or invoking something beyond both, the whistle survives as a reminder that ancient objects were not only seen and touched, some were made to make fear audible. Number 4. Celtic bog offerings. Across parts of northern Europe, archaeologists have uncovered objects placed deep within ancient bogs, weapons, cauldrons, ornaments, tools, and in some cases, even human bodies preserved by the peat itself. These discoveries are often grouped under the idea of Celtic bog offerings, though the practices span different peoples and periods. What unites them is the same disturbing pattern. Valuable objects were not simply lost in wetlands. They were placed there deliberately, as if the bog itself was a threshold where gifts could be given to powers beyond the human world. That is what makes these objects so unsettling. A bog is not an ordinary place. In ancient belief, wetlands often seemed liminal, neither land nor water, neither stable nor fully alive, a landscape where the boundaries between worlds felt thin. To cast precious metal, weapons, or ceremonial goods into such places was not wasteful in the eyes of those who did it. It was an act of communication. These were offerings, transactions with the divine, the dead, or unseen forces believed to inhabit the dangerous edges of the natural world. In some cases, the discoveries become even darker. Bog bodies, preserved with shocking clarity, suggest that not only objects but human lives may also have been tied to these ritual landscapes. Whether every such death was sacrificial remains debated, but the association between bogs, offerings, and ritual violence is impossible to ignore. The waterlogged earth seems to have functioned almost like a mouth, swallowing what people feared, revered, or wished to surrender. Their terrifying origin lies in that act of deliberate disappearance. Someone stood at the edge of dark water and gave something up forever, a sword, a treasure, perhaps even a life, believing it had to be claimed by forces no one could safely ignore. The objects that return to us from those bogs are not just relics. They are survivors of rituals built around surrender, fear, and the belief that the ancient world was full of places where the unseen could still reach back. Number 3. Mesopotamian demon plaques. In the cradle of civilization, where some of humanity's earliest cities rose beside the rivers of Mesopotamia, people did not only fear enemies, famine, or kings. They also feared the invisible. Disease, miscarriage, nightmares, madness, and sudden death could all be understood as signs of hostile supernatural forces moving through the world. And in response to that fear, ancient Mesopotamians created objects meant to confront those forces directly, including plaques, amulets, and protective images depicting demons themselves. That is what makes Mesopotamian demon plaques so deeply unnerving. Many of them show terrifying hybrid beings, winged, skeletal, animalistic, or grotesquely human, figures associated with danger, punishment, or the assault of malevolent spirits. At first glance, it may seem strange that people would create images of what they feared, but that was precisely the point. In many ancient traditions, to represent a force was also to name it, bind it, control it, or turn it back against itself. The image became a weapon. Some of the most famous examples are linked to beings like Lamashtu, a demon associated in Mesopotamian belief with attacks on mothers and infants. Protective plaques and incantation objects could be used in homes or ritual settings to guard against such threats, often invoking stronger divine beings to repel the danger. These were not decorative artworks made for casual admiration. They were objects created in a spiritual emergency, tools against a world believed to be crowded with predatory powers. Their terrifying origin lies in what they reveal about daily life in the ancient world. People did not make these plaques because horror fascinated them. They made them because horror felt real. Somewhere in an ancient Mesopotamian house, a family placed an image of a demon in the hope that seeing it, naming it, or ritually confronting it would keep something worse from entering the room. And that is what lingers in these objects even now. They are not only images of fear, they are evidence of how close fear once seemed to the ordinary lives of the living. Number 2. Etruscan funerary masks. Before Rome dominated the Italian peninsula, the Etruscans had already built a culture shaped by ritual, ceremony, and an unusually intimate relationship with death. Their tombs were not empty storage spaces for the dead. They were carefully constructed environments filled with objects, images, and symbols meant to preserve identity beyond the grave. Among the most unsettling artifacts linked to that world are funerary masks and death-related face representations, objects that seem to stand at the uneasy boundary between memory and the afterlife. What makes these artifacts so disturbing is the way they hold onto the human face while stripping it of life. A mask preserves presence, but only as an echo. It captures the outline of a person while reminding everyone who sees it that the person is already gone. In funerary contexts, that effect becomes even more powerful. The face is no longer just a likeness. It becomes part of a ritual attempt to keep memory, status, or spiritual identity intact after death has already taken the body. The Etruscans were deeply concerned with burial practice, ancestor memory, and the symbolic world surrounding the dead. Tomb art, sarcophagi, and ritual objects all suggest a civilization that did not treat death as a simple disappearance, but as a transition requiring order, ceremony, and representation. In that context, funerary masks take on a darker significance. They may have served not only to commemorate, but to mediate between the living and the dead, preserving a recognizable presence in a world where the body itself was already beginning to pass away. Their terrifying origin lies in that frozen intimacy. Somewhere in the Etruscan world, artisans created death-bound faces meant to survive the person behind them. The result is deeply human, but also unsettlingly still, as if identity itself had been lifted out of life and fixed into an object. These masks remind us that some of the ancient world's most haunting artifacts were not made to portray the living at all. They were made to keep the dead close. Number 1. The Terracotta Army. Few ancient discoveries are as overwhelming, as famous, or as quietly terrifying as the Terracotta Army. Buried near the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers, horses, and chariots were created to accompany him into the afterlife. At first glance, the scale alone is astonishing. But the deeper horror of the sight is not just in how many figures were made, it is in why they were made. This was not a decorative burial. It was the construction of an entire army for a dead ruler. The message behind it is unmistakable. Power was not expected to end at death. Qin Shi Huang did not merely build for life on earth. He prepared to continue command beyond the grave, surrounding himself with troops as though the next world would require the same obedience, control, and military force as this one. In that sense, the Terracotta Army is not simply an artistic masterpiece. It is a monument to the refusal to surrender power, even to death itself. What makes the origin of the army so chilling is the worldview it reveals. Every soldier was individually modeled with distinct features, arranged in formation, and placed into a hidden subterranean realm built for eternity. This was not symbolic in some vague or casual sense. It was an enormous funerary project shaped by fear, ambition, and the absolute authority of an emperor who intended his order to survive forever. The tomb complex around it only deepens that feeling, suggesting a vast afterlife empire constructed in silence beneath the earth. That is why the Terracotta Army takes the number 1 place. It is terrifying not because it is grotesque, but because it is disciplined. Ordered ranks of silent soldiers waiting in darkness create a different kind of fear, one tied to control, burial, and the ancient belief that death was not the end of command, but the extension of it. Standing before those endless clay faces, it becomes impossible not to feel the same unsettling truth. Some ancient objects were not made to honor death, they were made to rule through it.